Late last week, the Trump administration carried out a purge of the FBI, and an attorney for one of the fired FBI agents is here with us today, Mark Zaid, a prominent national security lawyer, who's here with us to talk about former FBI Las Vegas field director Spencer Evans. And I think that this story kind of dovetails into a lot of what we're seeing today about the use of federal law enforcement, both on the streets of DC and elsewhere, and Trump's use of federal law enforcement for his own ends. Thank you, Mark, for joining us.
My pleasure, Adam.
Well, why don't we dive right into it? Last week, your client, Spencer Evans, was part of the purge of top-ranking FBI officials, among them Agent Brian Driscoll, affectionately known as Driz by folks in the Bureau, Michael Feinberg, Walter Giordana. And tell me a bit about Agent Evans. He had a career that included a couple of very high-profile trials. Tell me about his career and who he is.
Sure. So he served more than 21 years in the Bureau. He was the special agent in charge of the Las Vegas field office at the time he was fired, although he was actually literally about to leave to a new assignment in Alabama, where he was going to be in a lateral move because he was actually being removed from the field office, but was told before he left that he was being fired instead. But he was, even in the time he was at Las Vegas, right? He worked on the bombing of the Tesla, the firebombing of it at the Trump Hotel, I think it was. Yeah. He worked on the Boston Marathon bombing. He has moved his way up through the ranks of the senior executive service. He was, as was stated actually in the termination letter, he was a senior official in the HR, Human Resources Division, who was implementing COVID protocols per the Justice Department regulations and policies. But that was what they said was the reason why he was fired years after, of course, he actually worked on these COVID protocols.
And that's what got him in Kash Patel's crosshairs, as it were. So tell me a little bit about, he also was involved in investigations involving the international kidnapping of Americans, very accomplished person. And yet it seems this COVID-19 issue just runs afoul of the Trump administration's political agenda, right?
Well, and there have been a number of people that call themselves the suspendables, if I remember the name correctly, folks who fought against the COVID vaccine from the inside, agents who refused to take the vaccine. And there were requirements, though. Actually, the Bureau didn't discipline, from what I understand, those who refused to take the vaccine. But there were requirements that if you're going to go in the office, you had to be masked and you had to take tests so that you wouldn't obviously infect other people. But even then, folks were refusing. So there were people who weren't given certain accommodations in their view. But that was back in 2021, 22, 23. Right? It's like ancient history at this point in time. But these individuals were trying to lobby for Kash Patel before he was even in his position as director, and then after, to secure the termination of a number of people, some of whom were connected also to January 6 cases. You mentioned the former acting director, Brian Driscoll, who back in February, when I was representing essentially all of the agents and support personnel within the FBI who had worked on January 6 cases, because the FBI or Trump administration was going to release their names and contact information. And you can imagine what that would do by doxing these individuals to enable now pardoned January 6 felons, often many of them were, some dangerously violent, to be able to find where these individuals' homes were. And Brian Driscoll, as the acting director, stepped up and blocked that from happening. Also, our litigation blocked that from happening, but he was defending his people on the inside. Now, out of the blue, all these months later, right? 5 months, 6 months later, whatever we're at now, these senior execs were fired. I'll say in the end of January, there were a number of FBI senior officials who were told either you're going to be fired or you have to retire. And Spencer Evans was one of those people. What we think happened was that they thought, whoever they might have been, that he was eligible for retirement. He wasn't. So that termination order, his name on the list was rescinded, and he was suspended for a period of time with pay, then put back into his position at the field office, where I should say he's received all sorts of commendations. In fact, the city of Las Vegas is about to give him an award in the law enforcement community for making the Las Vegas community safer. But yet, now he's fired.
When is the award ceremony?
Sometime later in August.
Oh, wow. So this month he's about to be feted just as he's fired.
Yes.
Incredible. You had mentioned January 6th prosecutors. One January 6th prosecutor, former January 6th prosecutor, is now suing the federal government over his termination. I want to read your statement. You said the purge of the dedicated, patriotic FBI officials like Special Agent Evans is an absolute disgraceful moment in history. What recourse does this highly qualified and soon to be celebrated at this award ceremony agent have?
Well, we will be at some point in the near future filing a lawsuit, not just on Spencer Evans' behalf, but on others as well, who have been terminated. This is under the guise of Article 2 of the Constitution. This is not the first one that this has happened. So we are actually, my firm and others are representing a former J6 prosecutor, the former public affairs officer from the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., and the former chief ethics advisor for the entire Department of Justice. We filed a lawsuit for the three of them jointly at the end of July. They were also fired under Article 2 authority. Those three were fired by Pam Bondi, the Attorney General. These most recent firings were done by Kash Patel, the FBI director, all under the same presumed authority. We've also got a lawsuit in the Eastern District of Virginia for the former chief financial officer of FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, who President Trump fired under his Article 2 authority back in February. There's been a whole host of other cases like this, but these are the first lawsuits that have been filed to challenge this authority, to say that actually one does not exist, because you have to, by law, by statute applied and adopted, passed by Congress, provide certain due process rights to these individuals. What are the bases against them? Right? You have it in writing. You have an opportunity to respond in writing. You have an opportunity to respond verbally. You have an opportunity to be represented by counsel. You have an appeal process. Well-established, long-standing principles that have existed for decades in all of these agencies, which this administration has just thrown by the wayside.
I want to ask a big picture question, because just today there's a trial going on about whether the Trump administration violated the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 in the troop deployment in California. And one of the things that came out today, there was a quote where the California's lawyer talked about the deployment of nearly 5,000 troops in perspective of that is larger than the number of troops sent to Afghanistan in the 3 months after 9/11. And I guess my question to connecting that to FBI firings, prosecutor firings, and the deployment of troops to police civilian streets is, what's the combined public safety blowback of all this. That the use of these resources to put federal law enforcement to do street duty and to take qualified FBI investigators, agents, prosecutors, and fire them because they don't pass a political litmus test. How does that affect public safety?
Well, so we're seeing it right in my town of Washington, D.C. right now, which obviously, as we're recording this, has just been essentially federally taken over. The police department has, for at least the next 30 days, been taken over by President Trump. He doesn't have to federalize the D.C. National Guard because, unlike California, there's no governor of D.C., obviously. It's not a state. So he has the authority already to use it, and there's talk of putting like 800 National Guards troops around the area. But there have been, I was told today, about 150 FBI agents were pulled off of assignments of going after pedophiles, major drug gangs, terrorists, other intelligence-related activities, and they're literally walking a beat on the U.S. Mall by the Washington Monument, which is already protected by D.C. Cops, already protected by federal park police, etc., of which there's very little crime in and around that area anyway. I'm sure there's some pickpocketers, purse stealers, roving teenagers, as some have said. But it's probably one of the safest areas you can go to. But if they're not doing their job, then that is greater risk, obviously, for what they were trying to stop, right? I'd much rather have pedophiles stopped than a purse snatcher. We want to stop purse snatchers, obviously, but not at the expense of allowing pedophilia to be ongoing. So there is a real danger, and it is an optics. It is an expression of increased authority by the executive branch that we have not seen in the longest time, in most of our lifetimes. Unless you want to go back to when there's real war time, and certain curfews have to be put in place, etc. This has been growing for the last 50 or so years. Dick Cheney, when he was President Ford's chief of staff, in the aftermath of the Nixon resignation, which was 51 years ago, just the other day, if I'm doing my math right, I think, right? August of 74.
Yeah.
He felt that too much authority had been ceded to Congress, which had, in the wake of Watergate, created the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, created the Civil Service Reform Act, which grants statutory rights of due process to federal employees, have created the Inspector General system, all of these of which are being dismantled by the second Trump administration. He's fired the Inspector Generals. He's fired the special counsel. He's removed members, administrative judges from the Merit System Protection Board, from the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, from the National Labor Relations Board. He's attacked personally federal judges up to and including Supreme Court justices who he disagrees with. All of that is grabbing power from both the legislative and the judicial branches to effectively create a kingship. What we actually, as we approach our 250th anniversary next year, what we actually fought a war to get away from. So there's a lot of danger I think that exists to both the rule of law and to our constitutional democracy as we've all known it in our lifetime.
At All Rise News, one of the things that I try to focus on is civic engagement. And I guess another big picture question that I have for you, your clients obviously have been targeted by the Trump administration because of politics, and you have been politically targeted by the Trump administration. You decided to fight back when the Trump administration revoked your security clearances, took them on in court. What do you say to people who might be watching who are trying to make that decision about, this administration is pretty vindictive. Do I want to go there? What went into the hearts and minds of your clients and yourself in making the decision to fight back?
For myself, it was an easy one. I was going to fight back no matter what. For most of my clients, I think that was a fairly easy decision for them. There are some who struggle with it. They're not used to being either in the spotlight or adverse to the U.S. government. They've been dedicated civil servants for sometimes decades. You know, I think about all the time Dick the Butcher, who probably your listeners, your viewers have no idea who I'm talking about. He's a character from Shakespeare's Henry VI from 1591. While we don't know the character much anymore, we know exactly what he said, which was the common phrase of "let's kill all the lawyers." And that has generally been interpreted as, certainly modified to become, this derogatory term of a criticism of lawyers. You know, we help only the rich, we subvert the rule of law, we're slimy ambulance chasers, things like that. It is the exact opposite of what Shakespeare meant with that phrase of "let's kill all the lawyers." Dick the Butcher was helping a rebel leader try and take down the king. And in order to do so, they needed to kill the lawyers first, because the lawyers were seen as the guardrails against authoritarianism. The ability to stop the rule of law, to stop perversion of the rule of law. So in order to when you kill the lawyers, that would enable the rebel leader to take over the government and impose authoritarian regime. So when I see what's going on now to just individuals like me, who was targeted not for being a political leader, the executive order or the presidential memo that I'm named in, it has all these names that people know. Nobody knows my name. You know my name. I'm sure I've talked with you over the years. Journalists know my name. Most people have no idea who the hell I am. You might know my cases. I've worked on a lot of high profile cases, but I was mentioned in the same breath as the Secretary of State, the Vice President, the President, members of Congress, all these big time Democrats or Republicans, of which I am neither. I was targeted because I represented the whistleblower, one of, in the first Trump impeachment in his first administration. And so I've been targeted because of what I have done as a lawyer, not because of who I am or what I believe in. And that is a danger to anyone to be able to, it's one thing we're protecting the whistleblowers, but then to think as a lawyer, you would be targeted, that you would kill all the lawyers effectively, try and take us out of commission, because my work is predominantly in the national security world, where my clearance, having one, made all the difference in the world for my ability to practice law, as well as to protect people, federal employees and contractors who work within the system. We are there to uphold the rule of law, not pervert the rule of law. Didn't care who was in power, Democrat or Republican. So to see individuals like me or other lawyers who have also been targeted is effectively trying to pervert the system to, again, increase the power that the executive branch has, to do away with the ethical norms, to do away with the conflict of interest authorities that generally governed. I will say, we all know the term authoritarianism. I throw out the term patrimonialism, and I encourage your listeners and viewers to Google it and look up what patrimonialism is. I had never heard of it until the last few months. It's been around for over a century, coined or at least developed by Max Weber from Germany. He was a lawyer, he was a philosopher, and it talks about, it's very common or overlapping with authoritarianism. It is not what we have seen in most democracies. When we think of authoritarianism, we think of Hitler or Stalin, not necessarily democracy, but communism, but that type of power structure that is surrounded by death and destruction. Patrimonialism actually is fearful of the deep state, which fascism and communism wanted and created to control, to increase its power. Patrimonialism doesn't like the deep state. They like chaos. They're fearful of the deep state because the deep state could rise up in power against them over a period of time. So chaos, personal patronage, putting people in power who are loyal to you as an individual, not because of the position you hold. right? Does any of this sound familiar as to what we've been dealing with President Trump, which has nothing to do with being a Republican, has to do with being President Trump and the people he's surrounded himself with, the people who make money off of stock trades because they know a tariff is coming the next day, or whatever it might be. So patrimonialism is what I encourage. That's the word of the day on Sesame Street, which I'm not sure exists any longer, thanks to President Trump.
And one more note on Dick the Butcher. It was cited in the context, the accurate context that you gave it, in a ruling by a federal judge ruling against Trump's attacks on a major law firm. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us on All Rise News on Legal AF here on the Midas Touch Network. If you've been watching, click subscribe right now to make sure that you get the next video like this. You'll be notified, and we'll see you next time.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.